Metaphysical Energy Healing, Chapter 1, Section 1. The Energy Experiment. Quote, "Don't be too timid and squeamish about your actions. All life is an experiment." Unquote. Ralph Waldo Emerson. The Human Energy Systems Laboratory, University of Arizona Medical School Campus, Tucson, Arizona, Winter 2002. I traveled to Arizona from Colorado to participate in the most amazing experiment I had ever been involved with. I call it the Energy Experiment. It was the last year of my training at the Associate Program in Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona School of Medicine, and I remember sitting on a patio drinking a beer with my fellow students and overhearing a conversation where a group of the students were going to work with an energy medicine practitioner. It was fate. I jumped at the chance. The nature of the experiment that I signed up for was mysterious. I had little knowledge of what was to come. I admit to my childlike excitement. In truth, in some ways, I had never really grown up. I had studied science and medicine since the age of 4, and had never seriously considered that there was something beyond what I had already understood. I was more than ready for a new adventure. Inspired by the Fellowship in Integrative Medicine, I started my small solo practice with the precise aim of exploring and incorporating varied traditions of healing. I called my practice, quote, Woodland Integrative Medicine. I was amazed by how well integrative medicine addressed the complex problems my patients faced, yet something was missing, and that something was energy medicine. Little did I know that energy medicine was to become my most cherished form of treatment. I would integrate energy medicine into my practice of medicine. It was late winter in the desert when my wife and I arrived in Tucson and drove about the campus of the University of Arizona School of Medicine looking for the, quote, Human Energy Systems Laboratory. I was anxious to meet everybody and find out what was going on, so I arrived early. All I knew was that I was to be in an experiment and meet a famous energy medicine practitioner. As a person whose scientific training began at a very young age, I was in for a surprise. While the other kids were out playing cowboys and Indians, I was playing scientist. The best Christmas present that I ever received was a jar of formalin-preserved dog organs and a dissection set. I was the ultimate geek and a fabulous nerd. I had a high-powered laboratory-grade microscope and was a very good chemist. Mostly I used my chemistry background to blow things up and set them on fire. I was very intelligent and at age 10 began to take college-level biology courses when my 5th grade teacher tired of my disruptive behavior in the class. She realized that I was simply bored by the material that I would complete, often well before the other students had ever really begun. Possessed of a very high IQ, by the age of 12, I had completed not only college-level biology, but college-level organic chemistry with a straight-A average. By age 30, I had participated in both bench laboratory and clinical research at the AMC Cancer Research Center and Hospital, the Webb-Waring Oxidative Research Institute, and the University of Colorado Medical School. I had always experimented on other things. My arrival at this strange laboratory meant that I was to be the subject of an experiment for the first time. Your arrival upon reading this book means that you are part of this energy experiment and the human experiments of millions of explorers before you. This experiment began over 5,000 years ago, or whenever humankind discovered energy medicine. You are now a part of the, quote, experiment that began that warm winter day. My gift to you is your own very personal experiment. Millions have undergone the experiment of consciousness. Our excursion into the frontiers of human ability through conscious energy medicine will inform you of your basic nature. I tried to contain my excitement about the upcoming experiment while waiting outside the laboratory. Several other people had arrived, and I tried to greet them, although I did not recognize most of them from the Associate Fellowship in Integrative Medicine. It was apparent that they were going to be subjects of the experiment as well. After about a half an hour of waiting, a young woman dressed very casually showed up and opened the front door. By that time, several other people, also subjects, had arrived. We were able to get into the front room of the small house. It contained several small chairs before an ordinary receptionist's desk. She checked off our names on a list. As we waited, the other members of the group arrived and checked in. I could barely contain my curiosity. While the receptionist was talking to some of the other arrivals, I was able to steal a peek at the back room. Various weird-looking instruments were arranged in a long, narrow room directly behind the front room. A room off to the side contained other strange instruments. I was thrilled at the prospect these scientists had developed machinery that could detect and measure subtle energy. As a scientist myself, I recognized that there would be a need for such devices, right? Wrong. The most precise instrument we have for measuring the subtle energy that is known as chi is the human body itself. I had some experience with human bioenergy in the past. I learned the discipline of molecular biology and became a bench researcher at the Webb-Waring Oxidative Research Institute at the University of Colorado Medical School. The other researchers in the lab often complained when I was around the spectrophotometer that my presence would make the machine malfunction. I would walk by and the needle would deflect. It was very inconvenient. I speculated as to whether these machines at this laboratory would be able to measure the energy that I had previously emitted when I was working as a scientist. What I know now, but did not know at that time, was that we were going to try to measure something that could not be measured. It turns out that out of convenience, we were calling what we were doing energy medicine. I now realize what we were doing could more rightfully be called conscious energy medicine. What I was going to find out through a series of remarkable experiences was that ordinary energy could not explain the results of our efforts in this field. Only a field of consciousness can. Gary E. Schwartz, Ph.D., a professor of psychology, neurology, surgery, and medicine at the university, had designed the experiment. I had never met him. I have plans to send him this material. I learned that Dr. Schwartz investigated the paranormal and wondered what interest he had in that field. Typically, research funding was reserved for the production of pharmaceuticals or testing of treatments that were very ordinary in comparison to what we would test that day. I later found out that the subjects themselves had funded the experiment. The world at large would barely notice. I was in for a shocking surprise that defied statistical measurement. After we gathered and signed in, we were subjected to a series of measurements using these odd devices. The women were given EEGs, electroencephalograms. I recall being measured by a gamma counter and placing my hands on a Kirlian photography unit. Kirlian photography is a method to measure what people regard as subtle energy emitted by objects. What energy were they looking for? I was aware that researchers in the paranormal claimed that Kirlian photography could detect the human, quote, aura, as well as the energy fields surrounding objects. I knew such measurements were controversial. In my work as a molecular biologist, I experimented on animals, but for the first time, I was the subject of an experiment. The machinery was strange to me, and we were given very brief instructions during the testing. The staff was courteous but efficient. I asked some questions about the Kirlian photography device. I had been asked to place my hand on a small glass plate, and after the baseline reading, quote, think about running energy into the plate, unquote. That was a weird set of instructions. These people did not seem at all like scientists to me. At least I had earned my white lab coat. I did not know what weird was. I was about to find out. The Energy Experiment, Section 1. Sensing Chi. We were then directed to a large classroom on campus. What we underwent in the classroom was also strange, and we were not given an explanation as to why this was being done. We were given instructions for another test. I remember being very nervous regarding the tasks that they set before us. What in the world was going on? We were told to, quote, run energy from one of our two hands into the hands of another person. The other person's task was to recognize which hand the energy was coming out of. The first person recorded which hand they had commanded the energy to come out of, while the second person recorded which hand they felt the energy coming from. One person held their palms in a position inches away to comfortably face the other's palm. During the tests, we were told not to indicate which hand for the other person in any obvious way. It was strange, and it felt awkward. The instructions for, quote, running energy were nebulous and vague. Nonetheless, I felt that I could detect something coming out of the one hand of my partner that was different from that coming out of the other. The sensation was slight, almost undetectable, but appeared to be an almost imperceptible tingle. Perhaps an ever so slight buzzing warmth that was unlike anything I had experienced before. Was it something that I had experienced before and never noticed? As the series of trials progressed, I became convinced that I could detect which hand the energy was coming from and became more skilled at running energy out of one hand versus the other. Or was I imagining this sensation? It can be difficult to sense something when you are swimming in it. It can also be very difficult to sense something that you are already sensing at some other level, by some other means. You will discover that you are surrounded by this vital energy some call chi. Strangely so it seems, chi is coursing through your body like a river of light at this very moment. While it is difficult to discern, you will come to know that chi can be discovered with the ordinary senses, as well as with a sense possibly yet unknown to you. Then you will know that it is not completely subtle. This new sense will appear as a gentle blossom of understanding at times. At other times, it will strike like lightning. If you can sense something and appreciate it as real, you can manipulate it as well. The first thing I do when teaching my patients the wonders of metaphysical energy healing is to provide them with a basic sensory for qi. I am very clear to let them know that the automatic machinery of their bodies is already doing so beneath their conscious awareness. To many in the Eastern world, everything is composed of qi. The qi that contracts the heart muscle propels the blood qi with every beat. The blood qi carries oxygen flowing in from the lungs, where it diffuses into the cells and organs to power the body. You may be familiar with this, but you do not have to think about it or even feel it for it to occur. Soon you will be familiar with another of the many forms of qi that naturally flow through your bodies in channels at least as complicated as blood vessels. This qi form also appears to have nutritive qualities, providing a vital force you are not yet aware of. This form of qi, and there are infinite forms, I like to refer to as human life force qi. Just like you can move the form of qi that is your flesh with conscious intent, such as lifting your arm, this form can also be easily moved as well. Soon we will be performing an exercise to demonstrate your ability to do so. It was immediately clear to me what was going on. Soon we would be retested to see if we had learned how to consciously project energy from our hands and sense qi in our hands. I had heard a rumor that we would be taught by a very talented teacher. I had no idea what she would teach us, but I was very anxious to meet her. All I was able to determine at that point that her name was Rosalind. It was obvious that she must be a very important individual for all the fuss. After a long session of many trials running energy from our hands, we traveled to a ranch 60 miles south of Tucson. I was in for the most eye-opening experience of my life.